Audio Jungle.
Hello, welcome to La Excellence. I am Harsha Mannava and I teach anthropology at La Excellence. We are discussing this book called Sapiens, a brief history of humankind. In the last video, we took up the first chapter and we discussed the important issues. Where did humans begin, and how when humans began there were multiple species, and with the emergence of Homo sapiens, how those multiple species eventually gave way to just one species. And we also took up some interesting concepts like the role of large brain that developed, how large brain gave humans enormous advantage. We also took up the discussion on domestication of fire and how fire gave humans so much power. In this chapter, we will take up the next set of questions. We are going one more step, a little more detail into the so-called events of cognitive revolution. For example, let us take two important questions, very normal, obvious questions. For example, if humans and chimpanzees were to fight one-on-one, who do you think will win? I think I would place my bets on a chimpanzee. Now, let us change this scenario a little. If you have 500 humans against 500 chimpanzees, who do you think will win now? Humans, right? Why? What's the difference? We'll see. Second, what is it? What is the role of cooperation in human story? How do large numbers of humans cooperate, right? For example, you would have wondered, have you ever wondered what makes people strangers do transactions? Money. But is money something that really has intrinsic value? You give a note of 100 rupees to a fruit vendor. He gives you fruits. The fruits are something that are tangible, right? You see value in fruit. But that 100 is nothing but a piece of paper. But what makes that fruit vendor give you those tangible goods, the food, for something that is intangible, something that doesn't have intrinsic value? Fruits have intrinsic value. Bananas, you buy and eat them when you're hungry. But can that fruit vendor eat the 100 rupee note when he's hungry? Clearly not. What does that mean? The note doesn't have intrinsic value, yet our entire economic system runs on money. We all cooperate with strangers in exchange for money. Now what is this? Can animals do that? Can two dogs exchange 100 rupees to exchange food? Not really. So what is it that is in humans that allows them to create some imagined entity called as money? Yes, money is an imagined entity. You can see the paper, but the paper is not worth that value. A 2000 rupee note, the paper itself is not worth 2000 rupees. But when you print 2000 rupees and the RBI governor signs on it, it gets value. What is it? It is not the note, but the underlying guarantee given by the government that gives it value. Now, one imagined entity, money, is supported by another imagined entity, the government. And so on, the chain is never ending. We'll discuss all these issues in today's session. Let us begin with the questions that we took up where we left in the last video. We said humans could overcome other species. Now the obvious question is, what is it that gave humans benefit? What made them so advantageous over others? The answer lies in what we call as humans' ability to develop language. So human edge did not come from their biological strength or muscles, it came from their capacity for language, and language is a consequence of some biological aspects. So around 70,000 years ago, some mutation happened in our genes. We can call it the tree of knowledge mutation, and this mutation allowed humans to develop language. They developed the capacity for language, and this language is the foundation on which so much else has been built. Now, language is unique, not just unique to humans. Many other animals also have some kind of communication systems, like dogs. They urinate on an area to mark it as their territory. And chimpanzees or some apes, some monkeys, they communicate through oral vocal sounds. But what is it that is unique about human language is that human language is amazingly supple. What do I mean by it? We can make a range of sounds and connect all these sounds in a coordinated fashion to make sentences and communicate meaning. And this ability to form sentences and communicate meaning allows us to transmit large, wide range of information. For example, a parrot can also talk, right? We hear about parrots repeating humans. So a parrot or a monkey can say, "Careful, there is a lion." But humans, using their language, are not just saying there is a lion. They can say, how far is the lion? Is the lion alone or with others? Is it looking fierce or not? Is it a strong lion or a weak lion? It can describe the lion's details. It can tell you, the human can communicate whether the lion is approaching you or going away from you. So much information can be conveyed in human language, whereas others cannot do that. Other animals do not have that ability. That gave us enormous edge. But the obvious question that follows from this is, fine, we have the biological ability, but what is this purpose of language? Some theories are relevant here. One theory suggests that language evolved, or language developed as a way of sharing information about the world. Humans wanted to share information about the world. I saw a tree there, I found some fruits on it, I saw some deer there, we can go back tomorrow to hunt them for food, and that side I saw a river which has clean water, we can depend on it. In that sense, humans developed language to describe, exchange information about the natural world around them. That's one theory. That's not so scandalous, is it? It seems sensible. But what we're going to do next, say next, probably will come as a big surprise. And what is that? The second theory says that humans developed language to gossip. Now I'm sure you must be laughing at this. I laughed at it too. But it is a very interesting idea. The underlying basis behind this idea is that humans are social animals. They live in groups. But when they are living in groups, this theory suggests that even more important than knowing the natural world around them is the fact that people have to know more about those who they are living with. It's important to understand who is whose friend, who is whose enemy. It's important to also know whether a particular person is a cheat or is trustworthy, who is having affairs. All this knowledge in the groups is the reason why people develop language. Now, if you're still not believing me, let me also tell you how gossip is a very important instrument of enforcing social order. Most anthropology students will understand this. In tribal societies where there are no courts, police, governments and jails, how do people ensure social order? How do people ensure somebody falls in line and does not do a wrong? If somebody does wrong, then people start gossiping about it. Most of the gossip, you will realize, is usually about wrongdoings in a society. So the fear that someone might gossip about you, if you do wrong. Even if you are not punished, the fear that the mere fact that they will gossip about you behind your back, and that will make your life miserable. So that makes sure that people do not violate rules, people do not do wrongs in a simple tribal society. So gossip is a way of enforcing social order before we have police and courts. So in that sense, the rumor mongers, those who we label as rumor mongers, were the original fourth estate. Before you had media and journalists, the rumor mongers were the community's journalists, and they were those who made sure that people were scared of gossip and hence they did not do wrongs. But let us get a little more serious. All this is fine, makes sense, but that's not all. What is really unique, what sets apart human language is that we are able to talk not just about things that we can see. Human language has this ability to transmit information about imagined entities. It is not just about men and lions. It also has the ability to transmit information about things that don't exist at all. What do I mean by that? Just take a look at this image. This is one of the earliest artifacts or one of the earliest artworks of humans. It's from about 32,000 years ago in a cave in Germany. So this is an imagery that early humans created. They carved this out. Now tell me, carving it is one thing, but what is the subject of this artwork? Is this a realistic piece of artwork? What is this? It's a lion man. So they created a man with human body but with a lion's head. Now is this a realistic image? Is any such creature alive in the world where they are looking at some natural object and where they are carving this sculpture out? Not really. This is an outcome of human imagination. They imagined this creature and they carved it. They did not see it in the wild and carve it. So humans after a point started transmitting information about things that do not exist, like this straddle lion. For example, earlier they could have said, see, there is a lion, be careful. From that they evolved to imagine ideas like the lion is the guardian spirit of a tribe. We are a tribe and the lion is a guardian spirit, it is sacred to us and we will worship it. But this is not the same with other animals. For example, to understand the importance of this idea of imagining, take a monkey. Can you promise that monkey, see monkey, now give me your bananas. If you give me your bananas, in return I will promise you limitless, endless bananas in monkey heaven. Will a monkey give you banana? It will just shout at you, threaten you with its fierce claws and go away. Because monkeys do not believe in this imagined concepts. Only humans have this ability to imagine, and that ability to imagine has given them huge benefit. They were able to devise things that no longer existed. What are these so-called things that they devised which no longer existed? They are what we call as myths, fiction. So imagination allowed humans to develop fiction that we call as myths or mythology. And this fiction and myths were not just about individuals. These myths were created and these myths were collectively believed. Please, this is very important. If an individual creates his own imagination and fiction, that's his personal fun. Like you may write poetry, right? Novels. But if an entire group starts believing in a common myth, that's something. What is the outcome of that? This common belief system serves as the basis for them to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. Please, that's very important. Myth is not just for fun. This common body of belief systems allows people to come together and cooperate. For example, if you take chimpanzees or monkeys, these live in small troops, 20, 50 individuals, that's all. But, and research tells us that gossip also helps people together. We discussed gossip, right? But gossip is effective only till about 150 individuals. If the group size is 150, then yes, gossip allows the group to function normally. But when the group size starts increasing, like 500, 1000, 2000, then gossip is no longer enough to glue people together. We need something else. That something else is what we call as myth system, common myths. So this common set of imagined concepts, imagined notions called as myths allowed us to cooperate in large numbers. Large numbers like could be 1000, 2000 at tribal level. At national level, at the world level, we have 7 billion people cooperating on corona pandemic. India, about 1.3 billion people cooperated at the demonetization time. All of them working together. What allowed this large amount of cooperation? Can you imagine, for example, if you let a few thousand chimpanzees in Tiananmen Square, Wall Street, the Vatican, or if you let them into the headquarters of UN General Assembly, what will happen? You will have chaos. It will be pandemonium, absolute pandemonium. But humans regularly go through these events in extreme order. Humans are walking through Tiananmen Square, they are trading in Wall Street, Times Square is full of large networks, our own Chandni Chowk is a crowded place, and we have large gatherings and meetings, and yet there is order. What is it that is unique to this human order? That is our common myths, and these myths are imagined notions. So if I might summarize this whole idea, we can look at this diagram. Gossip allowed us to cooperate, and cooperation then needed to be expanded. We needed to cooperate in larger groups. That gave rise to myths, bigger myths, and these bigger myths now gave us capacity to cooperate in huge numbers, and this cooperation is the reason why humans rule the world, whereas chimpanzees are stuck in labs and zoos. Though both of us are very similar, 99% of our DNA is same, even more, 99.9% of the chimpanzees and human DNA is the same. And yet, why is it that we rule the world whereas they don't? The answer is that we can cooperate on large scale, and this cooperation is working on a foundation of common belief systems. So let us see what are some common belief systems. For example, God, religion is one imagined entity. State, nationalism, a nation state is another imagined entity. Can you show me the government of India? I can show you Harsha. Here Harsha existing here. I can show you who is KCR, who is Narendra Modi. You can see them in person. But who is this person called Government of India? Can you WhatsApp him? Can you call him up? No. So the government is an imagined entity. Likewise, human rights, another imagined concept. We speak about violation of human rights. These rights have been violated. Now, if somebody asks you, please show me which right has been violated, I can show you a piece of pen, I can show you paper. Where is the right? Show the right to me. We can't show. Justice, laws, all are our own creations. Unlike a rock, a right is not something which you can show. It exists only in our imagination. Money, another imagined concept, like we discussed in the beginning. Money is not just a note. For example, you may Google Pay or Paytm somebody 100,000, 2,000 rupees. Now, where is that money? That money is shown in your bank. But where is it? Can you see it? No. Money is another imagined concept. In that sense, we created so many imagined concepts, and these imagined concepts in return facilitated cooperation. So today humans live in dual reality. What is this dual reality? Very, very important way of describing our existence. We have an objective reality that consists of rivers, trees, lions, rocks, stones, mountains. We also have an imagined reality which consists of gods, nations, corporations, money, so on. So human existence is characterized by an objective reality and an imagined reality. Today, at one time the objective reality was supreme. Today, the imagined reality became very powerful, and even our control of the objective reality is being done through the imagined reality. That our very survival of our rivers, trees and lions depend on the imagined entities like gods, nations and corporations. So the imagined entity reality has taken over the objective reality. So this table here is a very, very elegant way of describing this. Please, if you want to take note, pause the video and go through this. This table here summarizes this entire story very, very elegantly and very briefly and succinctly. Next, it is not just creating myths. It's one thing to create a myth, but the extraordinariness does not stop there. Our capacity was not just in making myths, but we can frequently change our myths. This ability to make and change these myths and recast these myths, these belief systems in accordance with the changing situations gave humans an extreme edge. Myths themselves, creation of myths and imagined ideas itself was a huge benefit. On top of it, they got this one more advantage. What is that? This ability to revise their myths and form new belief systems. For example, take French Revolution, a watershed moment in our history. Until French Revolution, people everywhere believed in something called as divine rights of kings. What does this mean? That kings rule because they got rights from God. Kings are supreme and all the subjects, the population must follow the king. That was the source of people not rebelling against even extremely ruthless and cruel or poor rulers. The order was maintained by people's belief that the king had some divine rights to rule. That was the belief until 1789, the French Revolution. Then there was this revolution. Soon after that, people believed in that divine rights of king for centuries before French Revolution. Now once this revolution happened, the ideas totally changed. They said liberty, equality, no supreme authority, no hierarchy, equality is a new belief system, and these two values, liberty and equality, started becoming the foundation of our new social order. Now what was right? Was divine rights right, or was equality and liberty right? What is the correct belief system? To put it very simply, until 1789, people had one imagined idea of divine rights. Second, now after this French Revolution, people revised their myth. No, our old myth is outdated. Our old myth that kings have divine rights is not right. We will change it. And suddenly they created a new myth in its place. That myth is equality and liberty. So divine rights is a myth, so is equality and liberty. Of course, one myth creates a better society than other myth, no denying in that, but that doesn't change the fact that both are myths, isn't it? So this ability to create myths and revise them according to needs gave humans the ability to go on a fast lane of cultural evolution. Prior to that, if humans had to change their behavior, it took them generations of genetic mutations. In other species, other animal species, for behavior to change, it takes enormous genetic mutations over a long time period for their behavior to change. But humans, on the other hand, could change their behavior in a very short span just by changing their belief system. This is a belief system, it is old, let me change it. This is a new belief system, my behavior changes. Very simple. In India we have many examples. We believed in the past in enormous bad practices like sati, child marriage, there was no widow remarriage, caste system. But today we are saying all that is bad, no sati, gender rights, women have equality, marital rape is bad, violence is bad. We are saying caste system is wrong, inequality, that is supported by caste system cannot be tolerated in a modern society. All these are our notions today. So we had some beliefs, some myths, today we have another myths. And in this change, our behavior changed so much. We are fighting things like open defecation, behavior that has been there with us for so many years. We are trying to change this behavior by revising our stories, by revising our myths. So this is how humans had enormous power at their disposal, all thanks to language, language giving rise to ability to imagine, imagination giving rise to myths, and myths having ability to being revised when there was a need. All this allowed us to cooperate, and our cooperation is the basis for our strengths. Here, let us take a very quick case study that is mentioned here. There is a company called as Peugeot. This is the company's brand logo. This Peugeot is a company that makes automobiles, and Peugeot company was created in 1896 by a man called Armand Peugeot. He died in 1915, but this company is still alive. Now we are trying to examine whether this company is an objective reality or is it an imagined reality. Let us explore this situation. Now let us say all the Peugeot vehicles exist, right? There are so many Peugeot cars, but do all the cars make up the company? Not really. Even if all the cars were burnt, destroyed, the company would still survive. The company has many factories, showrooms, employees. Now let's say all of them are wiped out. Will the company die? The company will still exist. Now a disaster kills all its employees. Does that mean the company is destroyed? The company can still rebuild. The company is still existing. What does this mean? The company called Peugeot SA is a figment of our collective imagination. And where is this imagination residing? It's a legal fiction which we call as a limited liability company, an LLC. So as long as this company has been registered with the French government in France, this company will exist. Even if all its cars are destroyed, if all its factories are displaced, even if all its employees are dead because of a disaster, the company will still remain. But if the French government says we are deregistering this company, the company dies. End of the story. So we created a legal entity called as an LLC, and that legal entity is a fiction. So the company Peugeot is not its cars, is not its factories, is neither its workforce. The company Peugeot is what it is, as what it has been registered with the French government. A legal entity, a legal fiction, that is what Peugeot is. So why did we come up with this concept of a legal company? If we go back a few centuries, around 1700s, people did not like to do business. Why? Because business is risk, right? So whenever somebody took a risk, set up a business, sometimes the risk works out, you are rewarded. But if the risk fails, what happens? You lose money. So if you take a risk and if the risk goes awry, if the risk goes the wrong direction, you end up losing your business, your property, you become indebted, you become penniless. That was a strong inhibition, that made a strong inhibition for people not to enter business. How do you solve this problem? Tada! People created a concept called as company, a limited liability company. What does this mean? Somebody creates a company, they borrow money, they have an idea, they execute. The idea fails, the company goes bankrupt, the company's assets can be auctioned to meet the loans. But the founder is a different person. So if I found a company and the company goes bankrupt, the company's assets can be disposed, but my personal assets don't become liable. So that gave people courage or some protective cover to take up the business risks. So humans developed the concept of company, which is itself an imagined idea, to overcome this limitation of business risk. But over time, this concept of company has become so popular that today it is the main player in the economic arena. Anybody wants to enter a business, they start a company. And over time, we have forgotten that this company is itself an imagined entity. It does not exist like a person. It's a legal person, they say. isn't it? So we have many such examples of imagined entities that have become common day aspects of our life. India is an imagined concept. United States is an imagined concept. Google is an imagined concept. Apple, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, all are imaginary ideas, but they have become so central to our ideas. So this is how our imagination and all these common myths have given us a rich body of belief systems that characterize, that facilitate our day-to-day living. And I'll conclude with the last idea, that is, until we had these cognitive revolution that allowed us so much creativity, history was largely, or history of all the other animals was largely a product of their biology. Their biology was the underlying mechanism that guided their story. But with cognitive revolution, humans became free from biological limitations. Until then, biology guided the course of a species history. If you had a mutation, there was new behavior gave rise to new events. But from cognitive revolution, human history was dealing to biology, and human history began being rooted in what we call as culture. Culture is the larger concept that embodies all this belief system. So our story started having its roots more in culture than in biology, and that's how we rapidly progressed and created this extremely complicated world we all live in today. That's it for today. Thank you. We'll come back again with another chapter.